Hello everyone, welcome to a new video that I think a lot of you are going to be very excited about. So the year 2020 is almost at an end, but before the year closes out, I want to make a video about a project that's been going on this year that hasn't got a whole lot of attention, a whole lot of coverage, but it's something I've been keeping my eye on. And as of the past few days, I've been checking up again on the recent builds and there has been a lot of progress. So I thought, hey, let's end this year with some good news. And so in this video, I'll be going over the Xenia emulator, what it is, reintroducing it to everyone, and also going over all the new improvements. But more importantly, the main focus of this video is saying how well does this actually perform compared to the original console? How accurate is it? How laggy is it? How is the slowdown? What works? What doesn't work? All those types of questions. And I think I've got a pretty comprehensive video covering that stuff here. So I'm really excited to share this all with you. But before we get into the technical side of things, let's just begin with a kind of baseline understanding of what is Xenia. So Xenia is an Xbox 360 emulator on the PC. You can only run it on Windows 10. That's an important distinction I want to put out there. So if you got a Windows 7 PC, which I did a few years ago, actually this was one of the main reasons why I upgraded to 10 with stuff like this, where stuff's just getting to be Windows 10 exclusive. And I think you might be able to run it on Linux in some form, but as far as the Windows users, 10 is the only thing it's going to accept. And also to run Xenia, for some people it's going to be a bit unfortunate, is that you need a pretty beefy GPU and CPU. You need a real system to throw out this emulation because, you know, this is some high level stuff. This isn't something like, you know, emulating a Neo Geo or anything like that. So you do need some real hardware power. So those are the main cons of Xenia. But outside of that, as far as the pros, we're going to see that there are a lot of pros to taking this approach. So another question that I want to answer up front before we get into the technical side of things is, why does this matter? Why would you bother with Xenia anyway, right? Why not just play on the Xbox 360? Well, there's a number of reasons for that. The number one reason, of course, is just accessibility to the titles. A lot of these titles are going to be harder and harder to get a hold of as they become more and more of collector's pieces rather than, you know, playable games that people buy and play. Another thing too is that 360s themselves aren't necessarily all that well known for being hardy, long-lasting pieces of hardware, right? I've had to replace two 360s already. I'm on my third one. And while you can mod them, and that does help a lot with accessibility and replaceability and all those types of things, there's also the idea of perhaps in the future with emulation, we'll actually be able to see significant improvement beyond what the original hardware can do. I've already previously shown in my SDOJ video, which you should check out, how weird things like changing the resolution of your 360 can actually change the performance of the game. So in SDOJ, if you play it in 1080p, it actually causes more slowdown than if you play it in 480i. And so then you get into these weird questions of, okay, is it intended to be played at 480p? Is it intended to be played at 480i? Can this help with input lag? Some of these titles like SDOJ or Pink Suites tend to have pretty input lag problems, and so in the future we might be able to see some emulation solutions for that, as we've seen with other consoles and famously with Shmup Arch and RetroArch. So, and of course, save states. I almost forgot. Save states are a huge deal, right? So the further we get into getting really accurate emulation and introducing save states, that's going to help people learn these games much more quickly and effectively, even over some of the games having pretty robust training modes. There's just no beating save states. So there are a lot of reasons outside of just pure convenience that this is really cool stuff. So let's get into how do you get Xenia, how do you set it up. The first thing you need to do is, of course, download the program, make sure you meet the system requirements. The second thing that you're going to need to do is track down the ISOs or JTAG dumps or R tags. I can't remember what they're called, the dumps or the ISOs. Unfortunately, that is a journey you must embark on your own. But I will give you a little bit of a hint. So if you launch the game, some of the games that are on this compatibility list, if you launch them and they're a white screen, that means there's something wrong with your ISO. It's not the right ISO. There's something wrong with it. If you launch it and it's a black screen, then there's some other things I can help you with. But if you get the launch in a white screen, that's an ISO issue. And I do know that if you have a modded 360, you can actually dump your own ISOs. I did this with Instant Brain. And so, yes, you can actually dump your own ISOs if you have a modded 360. So you don't have to necessarily engage in the world of piracy to make this work. Whatever floats your boat, right? And 360 games are easy to dump. You just have to have a modded console. So the first thing that I want to point out that's going to save everyone a lot of headache very quickly is as soon as you get Xenia, get it launched, and then go to your documents. You'll see in your documents folder, there's going to be a Xenia folder within that. That's just where it puts its configuration stuff on default. So open that up, open the config file. It's like .toml or something like that. Open it with Notepad or Notepad Plus, something like that. And inside there, you're going to find a setting called GPU underscore allow underscore invalid underscore fetch underscore constants. You're going to find that setting in there, and it's going to be set to false. Go in there and switch it from false to true. The reason you want to do that is some games will just not run or appear on the screen, SDOJ being one of them, if you don't have this setting changed. So that really opened up this for me, and so first thing, go ahead and go do that. Okay, so the thing about Xenia is that it basically runs on a 360 controller. So just plug in your 360 controller, your 360 pad, and it just recognizes it. That's really nice and easy. So controller config shouldn't be that much of a problem. I've actually never tried any non-360 controllers or arcade sticks because all of mine are compatible with doing that. But I'm assuming worst comes to worst, you can use some anti-micro or joy to key or something like that to get them to read your inputs, because it does read keyboard inputs. It's WASD though, it's not the arrow keys, so if you're used to using the arrow keys, there's a little heads up there. But let's get into the meat of this now. So for a long time, there were only a few Cave 360 titles that, and this is focusing on Cave 360 releases, not other ones, because most other shmups have better or easily emulated, right? These releases on the 360 are very important because they can't really be emulated all that well within MAME. Shmup Arch just straight up doesn't support most of them, except like Ketsui. But a lot of them you cannot emulate well within MAME. There's lots of input lag and problems, and load states and save states aren't really all that functional. There's just a lot of timing issues. There's just a lot of issues with the MAME versions of these games. But a lot of them don't have Steam re-releases. So I'll talk a little bit about how this compares with Mushi and Death Smiles, because that'll be really interesting because they have official Steam releases. But for the most part, a lot of these are just stuck on the 360, and so being able to emulate it on the PC is very, very cool. So the first title that is compatible that I've worked out is Akai Katana. This is a really, really cool game. As far as I can tell, I just played it for a few minutes. It seems to run, at least within the first few stages, full frame rate, no issues, just seems to work very well. And we'll get into the input lag and all that in a little bit. The next game that runs is Death Smiles. Death Smiles is actually one of the earlier ones that ran. Very, very solid performance there. DFK, or Dodonpachi Resurrection. So this game launches and it goes within the game, but the performance is not playable. It's way too slow. It's just not quite there yet with the performance. Maybe there are some settings you could go in there and tweak and change to get that performance to work, but from what I could find out of the box right now, DFK launches, so that's a good sign, and it plays, which is a good sign. It just isn't performing well, unfortunately. DOJ Black Label Plus, yes, that works. It works well. I need to recheck it further because I remember in previous builds I got like to stage 4 or something, and like the audio would cut out or it would like crash and stuff. I'm not sure if those issues still present themselves, so I guess give me feedback there if you'd like. But it does launch and play for the most part as it should. Maybe the audio issues still persist. I don't know. I didn't double check those. SDOJ is the big one. SDOJ, of course, and Futari are like the main reasons people are interested in playing Xenia, because yeah, playing them on the 360, right? That's like the only place you can really play them all that well, especially SDOJ. So SDOJ, from what I can see, runs as it does on the 360. The performance is like you're playing in 480i, which is good as far as the slowdown and stuff like that. So I think playing it on Xenia is actually better than playing it on the 360 for the most part. I'll talk again about lag and some of this other stuff moving forward. And then we have got Espgaluda 2. Unfortunately, I cannot get it to launch. I'm not getting white screens on Espgaluda 2. I got a white screen on Ketsui, so I was like, maybe my Ketsui ISO just doesn't work. But again, Ketsui I'm not really worried about because you can play Ketsui on Shmup Arch, or you can play it in the Destiny release, which is much better anyway. So I'm not really sweating if Ketsui works on the 360 emulator or not. Same thing with DOJ, but still. And then we got, but unfortunately, Espluta 2 does not launch as of right now. Mushi HD. So last time I checked, Mushi HD did not work. It works now. So now Mushi HD, from what I can see, runs very well. I hadn't run into any issues. I'm playing about the first 3 stages of these. So if you start playing these and they like bug out and explode on stage 5, I'm sorry. But as far as the first 3 stages, I wasn't seeing any issues. So Mushi HD runs, which is a nice update. And then we've got Futari. Futari runs as usual. That was like one of the main ones that people were using to investigate. Famously, Xenia is how Gus was able to figure out how to get around the counter stop in Futari. So thanks to Xenia, again, there's many things emulators can do. The counter stop in 1.5 Ultra has been pretty much solved thanks to Xenia. So that's another really cool thing about it. And then Pink Sweets and Muchi Pork, right? So I didn't check Muchi. I just checked Pink Sweets. Pink Sweets does run, and it runs like it should on the 360. Now, the 360 itself isn't necessarily all that accurate to the arcade game, but as far as being accurate to the port, which is kind of funny, yes, it is accurate to the port. So these are all the games that I've launched and been able to get playing. There might be some others that I just didn't check into, and but yeah. So those are the main ones. That's actually a pretty wide list of compatibility there, right? There's a lot of titles there that are currently supported, which is really cool. So now let's get into the very interesting questions. The first question being, how does the input lag compare between the Xbox 360 and Xenia? Well, luckily for me, a few years ago, or a year and a half ago, I can't remember, I actually tested all the 360 games input lag. And I tested it. You can check on my website for like a very in-depth explanation of how that testing process works. And over time, I think it has held up to scrutiny and has held up to peer review. So I think these are very solid numbers as far as getting accurate input lag readings on the 360. And so the thing is, since I was testing this on the PC, my method of testing was a little bit lazier, where I didn't actually break out the light and all that sort of stuff. Because I have this huge database of input lag on PC, what I was able to do is kind of do this shortcut where I could just do readings on my keyboard inputs and then compare them to previous testings that I did with the actual light and 60 FPS camera and all that stuff. And so the control that I used was Blue Revolver. Blue Revolver is an excellent input lag control specimen because it is 2 frames of input lag. To this day, I have not found anything that responds faster than 2 frames of input lag as far as a game or anything like that. All the best ones, even Shmup Arch, just seem to respond at 2 frames, which is really impressive. And so I was lining that up with my keyboard my keyboard readings, and basically the keyboard will read at the same time as Blue Revolver. So the keyboard has a 2-frame delay in itself, right? So that's actually pretty easy to adjust for. So as we go through, you'll see basically the first, because I record it with OBS and then I frame advance and count the frame advance, right? And snapshot them. So the first snapshot will be 2 frames of lag immediately, and then from there we can start to count them. So here are the readings that we got so far. So with Decimiles, we got 3 frames of input lag. And I'll say how this compares to the 360 at the end here. On Steam, because I thought, hey, while I'm at it, why don't I test Steam? Steam was, I'm going to call it like 2.75. Basically, it was 3, but you could get a 2 every now and again, but it was mostly 3. A little bit more responsive than the Xenia, a tiny fraction of a bit more responsive. So as far as input lag goes, the Steam ports are actually pretty damn solid. SDJ, 4.75. So how do you get 0.75? I explain this on my website readings, where basically you're getting 4 or 5. It's like either 4 or 5, and they alternate a lot. And just when you start to average how many times it was 4 and how many times it was 5, you kind of end up at a 4.75 average. So 4.75. Mushi, a solid 3. Again, on the Steam port, because I checked Steam, 2.75, so slightly more responsive on the Steam port. Futari. Now, the cool thing about Futari is if you go into the extra Maniac settings within Futari on Xenia, you can actually turn off the internal VSync, which none of the other 360 ports have this feature. It's ported by M2, so we know why this feature exists, because M2 are crazy like that. And so you can go in there and turn off the VSync within the game. It's kind of hard to explain. So when you do that, it takes out a frame of input lag. The cool thing is that since you're playing it on Xenia, you can like free sync it and stuff. So that's really cool. I wish more games had this feature. Futari, 2 frames of input lag when you take that VSync and put it to 0. Pink Suites, a whopping 5 frames. So how does this compare to the 360? All of these readings are essentially identical to the 360. Like pretty much the same. I think like down to the even 4.75 on S2J. So Xenia and the 360 are like the same amount of input lag. This is not a PS2 emulator situation where the PS2 emulator adds input lag on top of the PS2. In this situation, Xenia is actually incredibly responsive, or equally responsive as the 360. The cool part is there might be more ways. I was just testing this kind of on default GPU settings and all that sort of stuff. And so there could be ways in which you could get this down lower with like some crazy graphic card settings. Now I do have my graphics card on like, what is it, ultra responsive or whatever it is. But you know, there still might be some ways to fiddle around and get this even lower. But still, that's really, really cool that the input lag matches up. So you're not playing at a higher amount of lag than you would on console. That's a big deal to me, of course. One caveat that I have to caution you though is make sure that your computer actually has the power and the beefiness to be running the game at a solid locked 60 FPS and all that sort of thing. Because I remember when I was playing on my older setup, and then I had OBS running and capturing at like 1080p or whatever, and I had them both at the same time. My computer couldn't quite keep up, and I was getting a lot of extra slowdown. And when I looked at my frame rate reading within the actual emulator, the emulator was just lagging down because my computer just couldn't handle it. So some things maybe you want to do is maybe drop your screen resolution a little bit, drop it down to like 720p or 40p if you need to, just depending on your hardware settings. Or if you're recording, maybe use some kind of external recording capture or a second computer, or just make sure you got the power, drop the recording settings, whatever you need to do. That's what kind of makes streaming Xenia a little bit challenging, is because it just, you got to have that horsepower behind it to make it play and stream at the same time. So now we get to the really, really juicy part. So I actually was kind of already aware that the input lags were basically the same by just playing them and doing earlier testing, but I went through and like double checked. Yes, so they're the same. So the real question that I wasn't sure of is how accurate is the slowdown compared to playing it on the 360. This is actually a really big deal, right? If you're playing Mushi Ultra, or if you're playing Death Smiles, the Steam port of Death Smiles is pretty notorious for having pretty inaccurate slowdown. So theoretically, you could be playing Death Smiles more accurately in Xenia than you could on the Steam port. I don't think many developer or publishers would be happy with me saying that, but I'm just saying that's likely the case. But is it the case? So that is the question. Rather than just telling you, I put together this little demonstration of how I tested this. So what I did was I played a run in Mushi Futari, just original stages 3 and 4 that I knew had a good amount of slowdown in them. And I've saved that replay. So I played the run originally on the 360, saved the replay, played back the replay and captured it, and then imported that replay into Xenia, which was a pain in the ass. And if you ever need help figuring out how to do that, let me know. But it involved a lot of external testing, and the hard part was just there's no information on how to do this. Like, no one does this, right? So I had to just figure it out, and it took me like 2 hours to figure out, but I got it to work. So I then took that replay and played it back on Xenia, and I actually matched up the settings as much as I could to where I had like the exact same screen settings, the exact same VSync settings across them, so that just in case there's some kind of in-game variable, I matched them up so that the in-game settings are the exact same across the two. An important note is that I was playing my 360 in 1080p. So I've already shown that with SDOJ, if you play your 360 in 480i, it actually performs faster than it does in 1080p. The M2 port, I have a little bit more faith in that it is more accurate or more consistent between the different resolutions. but that's still something to consider after we watch this video, so roll to the video.
あれなんでここにいるの
There we go. So the conclusion is that I would say Xenia is highly accurate to how the 360 performs originally. Only a second or so different, like a second half difference in stage 3 and a 2-second difference in stage 4. And those are 2 stages with a ton of slowdown and with a lot of variability in the slowdown too. That's why I pick those, because the thing about playing it in like ultra mode or something like that is that there's just way more slowdown, and so ironically it could actually just be a bit more accurate because the slowdown's so heavy. With stages that have kind of in and out slowdown, that really kind of does tell you how accurate the slowdown is. And so the note that I was talking about before, where I play this in 1080p, it is entirely possible that if I dropped this down to 480i and played it in 480i, it would be even closer, like with S2J. I didn't bother doing that because at this point, 1 second difference in like a 3-minute stage or whatever, or 2-second difference in a like 4-minute stage, to me that's very, very accurate to what you're getting on console. I don't trust the 360 to be consistent in itself. I would say even with Xenia, you could be getting more consistent performance across it than the 360. Another thing to think about. So overall, my kind of messaging here is, if you get your hardware right, if you get your settings right, if you're making sure you got the beef to back it up, I think playing these games on Xenia is a viable alternative to playing them on the 360. You're going to get a very equivalent experience across the two, and maybe even some cooler additions, especially so right now Xenia does not support save states from what I understand, but it is an emulator, so at some point in the future I'm sure it will. And then when you get that going, that'll be an extra definite reason to check out Xenia. So I hope this was really cool and really interesting. I want to end this video by thanking my patrons. Thank you to Adrian Ryans, Dingo, Handicapped, Anthony A, Ben Win, Borgie22, Corio, Disco Star Slayer, Dominic NG, Eric H, Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Hausu, Kiwi, JLab, JB RPG, Joe Angelo, Gameboy Guru, K, Malays, Mark Toms, Martin Worrell, Maz, Meher Kalendrian, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, Okla Kugels, Philip Mason, Ram Q, Raul, Smacky Factor, A Sketchy Raccoon, TRM, Sugumo, Plasmo, Yusishi, and Utakaya. Thanks for watching.